This is an Urbinary interview. Urbinary. The podcast exploring how we understand and live urban spaces.
Joining us today is Gabriele Pasqui, full professor of Urban Policies and Planning at Politecnico di Milano. With degrees in socio-economic discipline and theoretical philosophy, as well as a PhD in urban policies from UAV, University of Venice, Gabriele brings a multidisciplinary perspective to understanding urban environments. His key research interests include interpreting the dynamics of contemporary cities, exploring urban policies, and examining urban governance and strategic planning. Thanks to his diverse academic background, Gabriele is able to observe urban spaces through less conventional and more flexible tools. These perspectives challenges the more tangible methods often favored by planners and urban scholars. In this episode, Gabriele's insights provide a rich backdrop for understanding where the field of urban studies stands today and, by extension, where we as urban scholars should position ourselves. His contribution set the stage for the discussion between Daphne and I, serving as both context and inspiration.
So we have here with us Professor Gabriele Pasqui, who is a professor in the Department of Architecture and Urban Studies in Politecnico di Milano, and we are going to ask some questions.
Why is observing urban space through fieldwork essential for urban scholars and practitioners? How does this practice contribute to our understanding of cities, and what specific values does it bring to our work?
First of all, thank you very much for the question and the interview. Observing urban space through fieldwork, in my opinion, is essential for urban scholars and practitioners because in planning and in urban studies, we should always have in mind that the final destination of our studies and also our practices are human bodies in space and the everyday life experiences of these urban bodies. So this is the reason why for me it's very important to catch the different dimensions of the uses of the space by different social groups, ethnic groups, populations, and so on and so forth. So the contribution to our understanding of cities, of this kind of practices, is really crucial. We need to understand which are the resistances of the space that this space give to urban practices, to the way through which people move, work, study, rest during the time that is not work time, labor time, and so on and so forth. So I think that the observation, and also especially the field observation at the street level, is very important. Otherwise, the risk is to have an image of these practices that is based mainly on observations that are not real connected to the everyday life experiences of men and women.
Okay, thank you. So we think that urban studies as a discipline is neither purely scientific, so objective, but neither solely humanistic, that is subjective. It occupies a unique space requiring scholars to consider multiple perspectives. So in this context, urban ethnography is a method of inquiry that enables us to grasp the city from an insider's viewpoint by immersing ourselves in the diverse perspectives and experiences of the people who inhabit, plan, build, organize, contest, or use it. So could you tell us more about urban ethnography? What is the usefulness of employing this method in urban studies?
It's important, first of all, to say that I am not an urban ethnographer. So I think that urban ethnography is one of the possible tools that we can use in this observation of urban spaces and the interaction between urban spaces, human bodies, social practices. From this point of view, I think that urban ethnography could be very interesting because the idea of the ethnographic thought is to be very close to the situation, to be able to stay with other people in the real situation that we have in the cities, and through which to perceive the different perspectives, the different points of view, the different interests that people have in engaging in this kind of spaces. So I think that the usefulness of this method is very high. It is not the only one, because I think that usually planners do some kind of observations of spaces that is not ethnographic. What ethnography adds to the normal observation that planners have in urban spaces is the idea to identify some patterns and some paths that everyday life experiences show in the engagement between human bodies, social groups, populations, and the different forms of urban spaces. For all these reasons, I think that is one of the toolkits that we can use in our analysis. Obviously, I have already said it's not the only one. When we design the city, when we plan the city, we are differently engaged in this street level observation. Sometimes it's not ethnographical, but it's also important.
Although the observation of urban space and human behavior is considered as one of the fundamental prerequisites for urban planning and urban design, sometimes listening and attempting to understand people's perception, experiences, and opinions might be challenging for urban scholars and practitioners. In your view, what are the main challenges in involving people in the research process?
There are a lot of challenges. My opinion is that the first challenge is in having always in mind that even if we are so close to other people, we are so close to everyday life experiences by many other subjects that could also be not human. For example, think to animals, think to other species, and so on and so forth. We have to remember that our practice is a technical practice in any case. Even if we are able to be deeply rooted in these everyday life experiences by other people, we are doing a sort of transcription of their experiences in our own, through our own writings, to our own sketches, through our own schemes that are mental schemes, theoretical schemes, and so on and so forth. So we should be able to catch the point in the observation, that is to be able to analyze and describe in a very precisely the everyday life experiences of urban spaces, having always in mind this situated context in which this observation take place. We are always technicians, even if obviously we have our own subjectivity, because in any case, we are human bodies in human spaces as the people we observe, as the other populations, social groups that we observe, and so on and so forth. So I think that this is the main challenge. If I can add another aspect, another challenge is to be able to understand that also the observed groups, individuals, species that are also not human, and so on and so forth, are very different each other. They should be analyzed in their own practices that, again, are completely different, because people use the urban spaces for many different reasons, in many different practices. We should always be able to understand that the sense of the human experience is always connected and deeply rooted in practices that are so different. The recognition of the variety of these practices is the first step in order to understand that we don't have on one side the observer and on the other side a generic situation that we can analyze, but many different practices that are more or less intertwined each other.
So this question relates to something you said previously about our subjectivity. So there is often a risk that scholars and practitioners produce expert knowledge that might overshadow or generalize first-hand accounts and subjective experiences of people and communities regarding a specific space or place. So to what extent can urban studies retain a degree of subjectivity and plurality, considering the subjective perspectives of people, but also of experts?
Yeah, this is very, very complicated. I've already tried to discuss this issue in the previous answer. I start from a short story. Some years ago, Stefano Boeri, that everybody knows, invited me in his course. And the idea of the course was to understand which were the consequences of observing the city from the point of view of the animals that live in the city. So birds, rats, and many other animals that we can encounter, insects and so on and so forth, many other animals that we encounter in our experience of the city. And the students were very smart, so they were able to have videos of the city from the point of view of the birds, from the point of view of the other animals, and it was wonderful. What I say is, okay, never forget that even if you say that this is the point of view of the animal, it's also your point of view. So we can catch a lot of information, suggestion, interpretation of the city through this kind of analysis, but we have to remember that this experience is always an experience that is translated in our languages, in our writings, in our forms of expression. So I think that from this point of view, our subjectivity cannot be put aside. We have to learn to consider this subjectivity, to use it in some sense, because it's impossible, I repeat, to leave it aside, but also to understand which role has in the transcription of the experiences of other people, social groups, species, and so on and so forth that we meet in the space. This is very difficult, because on one side we should do what we do in observing. On the other side, we should also be able to suspend our observation, our sight, thinking of the role that our languages, our forms of writings, and so on and so forth have in this description. I think that this is the very difficult and sharp situation in which we are.
So to be a bit practice, how can we as urban scholars or practitioners work together with, instead of for, people in practice in the prospect of observing, studying, planning, and designing urban spaces that take into consideration the subjective nature of human experience?
These questions are so complicated that it's impossible to give an answer to this. Only some suggestions. I think that this point in some sense is crucial if we think to urban studies, but also especially to planning and to design as practices that are involved in the life of other people, citizens, users of the city, and so on and so forth. I think that, first of all, it is not true that always, for example, urban scholars, practitioners, planners, plan for people. It should be enough in some cases that they are able to plan for people. Sometimes they plan for someone else. So, for example, for the developers, for the administration, that obviously have their own interests, their own point of view, and so on and so forth. It's not the same if you work for the public administration and if you work for the developer. But in any case, it's clear that in that case, the first reference is a reference that is not everyday life experiences of the people. And in general, I think that one of the problems of planning and of urban design, I should say also architecture, is that we don't consider too much the effects, the final effects, not the intentions, but the final effects of what you do in the real experiences, everyday life experiences of people in the city. This is a typical problem of the technical disciplines, of the disciplines that are so involved in practices, but that are also involved in institutional processes, in government rules, and so on and so forth. So for this reason, I think that, first of all, having in mind not only the intentions, and not mainly the intentions, but first of all, the effects, the outcomes of your planning, design, and so on and so forth, is the first step in order, first of all, to be able to plan for someone else, having in mind at least someone else. Another step, another aspect is how to work together with others. This is very complicated. First of all, because we should always have in mind that, for example, in all the participatory processes, experiences that in the last decades have become more and more important in planning, urban design, and so on and so forth, have a lot of interesting things, but also a lot of problems. First of all, we should always have in mind, okay, but who participates and for which reasons participate, through which instruments, with which knowledge it participates. So I think that the idea of planning with is very challenging, is very complicated, and we should have in mind that we should accept the idea that the people engaged in a co-planning or a co-design experience should have attempts, objectives, values that are completely different and also completely different from ours. We should accept these and take into consideration and cope with this variety. This is the variety of life. Albert Hirschman said always that we should be able to have a sort of reverence for life. So life is what is important, and we should be able to understand that life means conflicts, different ideas, and so on and so forth. Second, I think that we should understand that co-planning, co-designing, so what you say here, what you have asked to me, work together with, doesn't mean to use technical tools. Obviously, technical tools are important. They are very relevant because it's important to understand how to engage people, how to work together, and so on and so forth. But the technical aspect is not so important. The most important thing, in my opinion, is the recognition of the differences, of the varieties of the forms of engagement, of the values, and so on and so forth. And also the variety of knowledge. If we believe, as I believe, that the knowledge produced through the interaction with the other people could be very valuable in this kind of processes. Here, my reference is Charles Lindblom that said, we have a sort of common knowledge interactively produced in this kind of process that could improve this process, could enlarge democracy, obviously, but also could improve the quality of the design, of planning, and so on and so forth. So these are different problems in this idea of working with that I think we should always interpret not as a technical challenge, but as a social and political challenge.
In your experience as professor of urban policies, do you think that methodologies regarding the subjectivity of people's experience of urban space are sufficiently addressed in academic curricula?
Here the answer is very simple. It's very easy. The answer is no. I think that in our Polytechnic, in Politecnico di Milano, especially in our master course in planning, there is an attempt to take into consideration these dimensions. But I think that this approach should be internalized in all the experiences of the students in the workshops, in the seminars, also in the courses that we give for architects, for planners, for urban designers. So we need a lot of experiences of this kind of approach that is obviously ethnographic, but not only ethnographic, as I said before. And we need also a point of view that we should be able to give to students, through which the idea is that, for example, architects, not only planners, understand that what they do at the end of the day is something that produce effects in the long term in terms of practices of use of the spaces, in terms of changes in the perception of the spaces for many different people and populations. I think that this approach should be more and more enlarged in our courses. I repeat, not only for planners and urban designers, but also for architects.
So the fundamental question that we're asking to all our interviewees for this episode is, what kind of observation should we aim for in studying urban spaces? Urban studies, situated at the intersection of technical and humanistic fields, face the challenge of balancing objective inputs, such as quantitative information about the environment, with subjective judgments, such as a single individual's perception about the same environment. Should we strive to set aside our perceptions, or does our perspective inherently shape the way we observe? And if it does, how should we position ourselves as observers?
Okay. I think that, our perspective shape the way we observe. This is obviously crucial in my opinion. And our position as observer, as I tried to say also before, is very relevant in order to understand what we do when we observe. And I'm not telling that the direct fieldwork observation, the observation of everyday practices, the street, the street observation is the only way. Obviously, we have many other tools in order to observe the cities using data, for example. In this phase, in planning, there are more and more data than decades ago because we have the availability of a lot of data, tools, instruments that are also very sophisticated. My point is that we should always have in mind that this vision is partial. It's not the only potential vision, for example, of the environmental issues. Second, it's typically a vision that doesn't take enough into consideration the perception of the environment by people. So I know that you will discuss with other colleagues about this specific issue. So my point of view is to put together different sides, having always in mind the specific characters of each of these point of view of each side and so on and so forth. So which kind of observation? Many different observations, taking into consideration our subjectivity as observers, as technicians, but also the interaction between the different forms of observations and the different points of view that people have. I take a simple example for concluding. It's obvious that there are a lot of perception of the environmental problems in the city. But are we sure that all the people who live in the city have the same perception of the nature and of the size and of the characters of the problem? I'm not sure. So obviously we have a lot of data that say the problems of the city are these, that there are a lot of evidence that say that there are some huge problems connected with, climate change, resilience to climate change and so on and so forth. But we should always have in mind that the everyday life experience of people could be very different. And this is important if we want to plan, if we want to produce effects, if we want to be able also to change the mind of the people through our action. If we don't understand how people perceive the problems, we should not be able to cope with these problems and to be effective in analyzing them, but also in proposing solutions for these kind of problems. So the idea is to have a clear awareness of our position in the research process and of the plurality of point of view, interests, values that are at stake in these kind of very complicated issues. Thank you so much.
Very much.
Try to imagine how everything we discussed today could reorient research in the field of urban studies. What do you think should be included in an orientation manifesto?
Yes, I think it should be included, at least from 3 points of view. The first one is how to cope with the problems of subjectivity. That is both the subjectivity of the researcher and the subjectivity of all the other actors or actant, if you want, if you consider also other species that are not human in the urban spaces. So this is the first point, how to consider the problem of subjectivity. Second, to understand that the observation, the description are not natural, are not technical. They are based on values, point of view, and so on and so forth. And for this reason, the observation of urban spaces through fieldwork and also, for example, through the through the tools of ethnography, urban ethnography, could be very relevant. So this is the second point. The third point is to consider variety and plurality as a value. Even if we know perfectly that could be very challenging also for planners, urban designers, taking into consideration and recognizing that a plurality of interest, value, perceptions, subjectivities are at stake, and we could always take into consideration this variety not only as a problem, sometimes is a problem, but also as a potentiality, something that can produce new knowledge, new common knowledge, new interactive knowledge that could be very, very interesting for planners, urban designers, and also experts in urban studies.
Urbinary is produced in collaboration with Polyradio and the Department of Architecture and Urban Studies at Politecnico di Milano.